So our assignment is to conduct a service process audit. So as I've said, that in your team, you'll be interviewing a manager and what? Employee, a frontline employee, meaning an employee that interacts with customers, and finally a customer or one or more customers for that. And the reason we interview these different perspectives is to help reconcile them and help understand how they come into agreement, but maybe how the process may be different than the way it was originally designed. And so this is very valuable to be able to have these different perspectives to help us understand, okay, how can this process be improved and maybe brought into more alignment? So a service process audit is a structured interview. And so I just passed out to you these forms that we have, which are the interview forms. And so what I'm going to do now is take you through this. And we're just going to kind of go through an example of this. And then you as a team will then parse this out among your team members and do these interviews and then come together and produce a report. At the end, I'll actually take you through the report and show you how the write-up goes and how we analyze these and what that will then help us into our doing our end of the semester project, which is customer relationship management futures. So I need a volunteer. And just to let you know, this if you volunteer today, you'll actually come up here in front of the class, I'll interview you, and then I'm going to post this on YouTube so that all the students that want to can come back and review this. And so by volunteering today, you're going to have to be giving me permission to post this on YouTube. So there you go. But you could be famous. My Samsung refrigerator repair broke 80,000 hits. So you never know. You could be a YouTube star.
The ad revenue?
What's that?
You get cut of the ad revenue?
I don't know. I should be getting ad revenue from Samsung, although it's their flaws in their refrigerator that's made me famous. All right. Do we have a volunteer today that would like to be interviewed? Go ahead, Marissa. Come on up.
I want to be famous.
Congratulations on your YouTube.
All right. So. All right. So let's see. Ricky, can you see this okay? Can you see the form?
Yeah.
Sorry that the resolution is what it is, but okay. So Marissa, we're going to do a service process audit. Now, the instructions that you have here, it says study the instructions and review the chapter which is chapter 6 in the book. Complete the study parameters below. So we're going to actually go through this and do the study. Now, I want to do something, Marissa, that is it's a simple business process that you're familiar with, but not something that you're going to do for your actual project. So I know you're going to do a school educational situation. And oh, by the way, for this, we're sufficiently social distance. Masks are not as important, although this is going on video here, so I might get in trouble for that. But for you, I'd like you to take off your mask if you don't mind.
I just got COVID, so I'm not getting it.
Oh, okay, good. You just got not like yesterday?
No, like.
Okay. Oh, God. Right. The reason is I want the voice to project into the recording, which is up in the ceiling, and it's a little easier to hear. That's why I'm not wearing a mask today. So it's a little easier to hear without the mask on. So we need to do, I want to interview you about a business process. And so for your assignment, do something that is, sufficiently interesting that it has enough steps that you can do some analysis with, but not something that's overwhelming, and we'll see what that means in a minute here. So, and as well as we're going to do this in class, we're going to have to go through all this, and people in the video audience are going to have to watch this. And so let's do something that's kind of interesting. Do you have any examples of a process that you'd like to do, or even the class could recommend things? Is there a process that you think, oh, here's something I've done recently as a process, as a customer, or maybe even as an employee or whatever?
I wanted to go for a weekend, getaway weekend, or how do you call it? Yeah.
Getaway?
Yeah.
Yeah.
During a weekend with my kids.
Mhm.
So I had to look for a place to stay somewhere else other than Provo, but not in Mexico. I couldn't go to Mexico. So I had to go somewhere nearby, maybe like looking up an Airbnb stuff.
Okay. Actually, you don't want to go to Mexico.
Oh, We could. I mean, it's just an exercise, right?
Well, yes. I say that.
Yeah, we could go.
The reason is in an earlier class, because this is, I do this with my executive MBAs. I did that a couple weeks, I've done this a couple weeks ago with them, and I did with my undergraduate students. Interestingly, earlier today, the one that we did was a place called, the student did, was a company called, and I can't even say it. I thought I could say it before. No, it's not VRBO, it is. All right. I can't say it.
Got it.
Say it again?
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought it was X carrot. It's not, X carrot, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, just got it.
You've heard of that place.
Oh, yeah. I've
Okay.
been there.
I've been there too, but I obviously mispronounced it last time I was there. Didn't realize, so. So anyway, but I like this idea, but what we need, so the industry that we're going to do, so I'm going to start filling this out for the study parameters. The industry that we're going to do for this little practice here is going to be, travel. Okay, you want to travel somewhere, travel, maybe hospitality. And we do need a provider. So we could do Airbnb as an example. If you want to do Airbnb, that could be fine. I can never remember, is the B supposed to be capitalized or not? Is it just capital A? Who knows? I mean, it's not, at least it's not as complicated as cray. Whatever it is. So anyway, I was told earlier today that I was saying it wrong. So, okay, the customer is called, what are you called? You're going to do this from the perspective of, what's that?
Marisa.
Yeah, but what are you titled? What do you call? Are you called the customer? Or are you called a guest? Or a tourist? We'll call you a customer. Customer is kind of the default. If you don't have a name for it, you call it the customer. But in a hospital, what do you call the customer? Patient, yeah. In a consulting firm, what do you call the customer?
Client.
Client. So you have different, in some context, the customer has a different name. Okay, so the process we're going to study is what? What process will we look at? Renting a house. Short term. Or getaway. I like it. I like it. Okay, now, in order for this to work, and especially as we do this among our teams, is that we need to all be doing the same kind of what we're going to call a process segment, as the same bookends of the start and the end of the process. So the start, as we talked about previously in class, we often start with the customer need. So we start with the step of customer needs a getaway, right? Customer needs getaway.
I have a quick question.
Please.
So I know like this is a working session, but when we go do these, do we want to have this defined and we just present it to them?
Yes. We're going to see that in just a minute. So I'll take you through that. So when you do it, you have a team has already decided what all these parameters are. You will not have this discussion that Marissa and I are having together here now. Right? All right. So what's the last step of the process? So you need a getaway. Where will we conclude this thing?
My need is fulfilled. So when I'm there.
Okay.
Finally, when I get there to when my stay is finished. I don't know.
Okay, we can do either. We can do either arrive at the Airbnb or stay is finished. Now, for the sake of this assignment, and we'll see this in a few minutes, is I'd like you to do something that's like, somewhere between a dozen and 21 steps. Okay, meaning not too much. If it's more than 21 steps, it's probably too complicated for the sake of the assignment. If it's fewer than a dozen steps, it's probably too simple. So I think maybe the problem is once you're in the Airbnb, there's a lot of complexity there with what if you find out one of the appliances doesn't work? Or what if something happens and you get locked out? Or, there can be lots of complicated things like that. I think for the sake of this discussion, why don't we finish it with you enter the Airbnb. So it gets you to, into the Airbnb, okay? Customer enters B. All right, so that's our process. So again, as a team, you will decide kind of what those parameters are. So now when you start the interview, what it says here, you complete the parameters, the study parameters. You'll write the name on the form. I'll show you the form in a minute. The interviews involving a simple process like we're going to do here, well, it might typically take 15 to 20 minutes. And so that's normally what they would take, is don't ever plan to take more than about 20 minutes on these things. On occasion, you get somebody that really wants to talk about their process a lot and just, complain about how it's not like they thought it should be and stuff like that. That's fine. Let them rant for, an hour or two, but then after that, tell them, you have to go have knee surgery or whatever. Don't make something up, but they can sometimes drag on a little bit, and that's good. But you put a kind of a parameters on that. But if we just go through the process, it should take about 20 minutes. It will take longer than that today because I will kind of give some commentary as we go along with this, and we're going to answer questions. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, there are 3 parts to a service process audit. The first part, to the interview portion of it, have the interviewee tell the steps of the process, tell them the first and last step. Possible dialogue might be, so here I could say, Marissa, I am studying the process of what a customer goes through to rent a house short term. Please describe the steps that you would typically go through as a customer to rent a house with Airbnb, beginning with the first step, and then whatever the first step is, which is customer needs a getaway, and ending with the last step, and then whatever the last step is, which is the customer enters the Airbnb. Now, in this particular context, we have to identify who the provider is and the customer. And for any of these, as we've done in our prior assignments, you have to identify a customer and a provider. And sometimes it can be complicated because we have multiple providers. So in the case of Marissa wanting to rent a house, is the provider Airbnb or is the provider Sally, who owns a property in San Diego? Who's the provider? I think we'll probably have kind of Sally maybe be the provider, or maybe Sally using the platform. In a real world assignment, you might have Sally be one entity and Airbnb be another entity and Marissa being another entity and so forth. And that's more complicated than probably we're going to do for this assignment here. So it's kind of best for, at least for this initial service process audit, to do something that kind of involves a provider and a customer. And so what we'll do is we'll view kind of the Airbnb platform and Sally the San Diego house host is kind of the provider. Sarah?
This isn't necessarily about the audit, but when you're thinking of piecing diagrams like that, would you have it be kind of like a chain where you'd have Sally and then Airbnb and then the customer? Or would you have it where Sally and Airbnb are kind of parallel processes connecting with the customer?
No, it could be either way, but they're 3 separate entities. And in fact, so let me ask you a question, Sarah. Do you understand Sarah's question? So you have in the situation where we have, the customer, Marissa, we have Sally, who's the host, we have Airbnb. Now, wait a second. We said Marissa was the customer, right? Is Marissa the customer or is Sally the customer?
Depends.
Who's the customer of Airbnb? See?
It's a marketplace, so both.
Yeah, it's kind of both. Yeah. See, what I'm suggesting is that, again, we talked about this, I don't know, a week or so ago, a couple weeks ago, is that this idea of talking about providers and customers is kind of a false dichotomy, because in any given relationship, at some point you could be a customer, and some places you could be a provider. So the customers of Airbnb are probably largely the hosts, and the customers of the hosts are largely the people that stay at the properties, and they use the platform to kind of do that. So I would say you can depict it either way, but I would not consider it to be the customer all on one side and the provider all on another side. They're just all entities. You can do it as like a big triangle here, and they can be entities. But I like your idea about this fact that the process kind of ties these entities together. Later in the course, we'll talk about, in fact, actually on Thursday this week, the article that we're going to cover, which is the Norman Ramirez article, we'll talk about this idea about how do you depict a network. Really, these things are often, they're very rarely actually truly dyads. They're really a network. Good question. But for this assignment, let's try to keep it simple enough that we can kind of, do some basic analysis. Okay, so I took through the first one. So now as the interviewee speaks, that's you, write the steps on the form, beginning, using every other box, inserting steps as necessary, use more than one page if necessary. So let's actually go through this. So I'm going to tear off this first page and set it aside. And so interviewee, Marissa. This one is.
Yes.
Today is February 8th, 2022. Have you been an Airbnb customer for very long?
Maybe about 5 years.
5 years, okay. So your role in this is a customer. I want to say 5 years. And that will be helpful as we do our write-up. So I write down that information. The provider is Airbnb. And I'll say Airbnb, it's really the host. And the process is renting a house short term. Okay, the first step is customer needs getaway. Now this is different. There's another process which is robbing a bank. Just to clarify, we're not doing that one today, okay? This is different. Okay, so what happens? So you need a getaway. What happens next?
How detailed do you want me to be?
Okay, now that's a good question. So when I look at the audience, it's like the, what do they call that in theater? It's like the fourth wall or something like that. You know, breaking the fourth wall. So when I look out at the class, I'm breaking the fourth wall here. So this is a very important question. In fact, it's funny because I saw this play over at the Hale here in Orem yesterday. It's called Over the River and Through the Woods. Have any seen that play? This is the last week. It is so funny. It's about this guy who visits his grandparents who run guilt trips on him and stuff like that. And it's so funny. But every so often the light dims everywhere except for on the guy. And when that happens, you know he's going to break the fourth wall, where he talks about his grandparents and his relationship with his grandparents, and commenting on how they're trying to manipulate him and how great that is. So anyway, so when I'm looking out here, I don't have that control over the lights here, but how detailed should these be? How do you know how much detail to include in this? What do you think? Any thoughts about that, Kyle?
12 to 21 steps.
Okay, 12 to 21 steps. That's a good guide. Other thoughts, Dylan?
I figure just let the person you're interviewing be as detailed as they want, because then you can go back and decide like if some of those are together in one piece,
Yes.
or if it's just super unnecessary or whatever.
I like that. So one is let them kind of just take it as they go. Now, however, this is an important thing to think about here, is you do not want to lead them on this. In fact, as we go through this process, there's sometimes where I'm tempted to say, wait a second, didn't you forget a step here? Or no, you're not describing. I mean, don't tell the person you're interviewing, you're not doing that. You're not describing this right. It's like, I'm the customer here. I'm just telling you how it is. Like, no, you're not telling me. No, you don't do that. Okay. So, but what you can do, which is helpful, is to nudge. Meaning sometimes you might nudge them about things and say, like, for example, actually, here's an example of one that maybe was too detailed. Is I was doing this with some of my executive MBA students a few weeks ago. And somebody asked a question. He said, okay, they were actually doing, I can't remember what the business process was, something like Uber or something like that. And it was renting a car. And so one of the students raised his hand and said, now, should we include things like, open the car door? Sure, go for it. Okay, see, open the, well, yeah, what about reach for the handle, and grab the handle and lift the handle and pull the handle, and then there's a decision step. Is the door locked? And if the door's locked, then you say, hey, knock on the window and say, hey, the door's locked, and then unlock it, and then try the handle again, and like this, and then opening the door, it's like pull the door and then pull it open. And is there something next to it that's a bear? It's like, no, too much detail here. Okay, that's not helpful. But on the other hand, to say, we need to rent an Uber car, so we schedule Uber and we drive to the destination, and we're at the destination. It's like, well, wait a second. There's a bunch of steps in there that might be important in terms of improving the process. That might be fail steps, or might be wait steps, things like that. So we want some of that detail there. So frankly, some of this is judgment. It's like we use our judgment about, oh, okay, is this going to be relevant? Is that level of granularity going to add some value? And if not, we don't need that level of granularity. Does that make sense? So if you have a process, it's like, okay, we're going to take a vacation in New York. So we buy a ticket, we drive to the airport, we get off the plane in New York. You know, it's like, wait a second, there's a bunch of steps in the middle. Does that make sense? So let's just kind of go with it. And then if I feel like it's maybe too detailed, I might just only summarize things here. If I feel like it's not detailed enough, I might nudge a little bit. And again, it's okay to nudge, it's not a good idea to kind of lead the direction of the interview. Okay, so the customer needs a getaway. Then what do you do next?
Okay, so the first thing I do is I go online and search for, I don't go straight to Airbnb, to be honest.
Okay.
Is one of the tabs I open, but then I also explore like Expedia or some other options.
Okay, search online for, I'll call it, at this point, they're kind of services
Mhm.
in a general sense. Okay, then what?
Then I enter the dates I want to go
Okay,
and the place I want to go.
okay. And
Dates
place.
and place.
Okay, then what?
Start comparing properties, like the prices and what they offer.
Okay, comparing properties. Okay, good. Now, are we on, which website are we comparing properties on?
Oh, Expedia probably, and then Airbnb.
So we're still doing all the different
Yes.
services. Okay, all right, that's good.
Because my husband doesn't do it with me, I do it on my own.
Yeah.
When I have something, I go and show him all the research I did.
Sure.
He wants to have options.
That's good. That's good.
He doesn't.
I hope
wanna
you
do that.
charge him for this. You know? He says sole dish duty for a month after doing all this work. Okay, start comparing properties, then what?
Yeah, and then I usually go to Airbnb because when you stay longer, you get cheaper.
Yes,
And so, yeah, so, but I still want the reference for the other ones.
okay.
And occasionally I find good deals on the other ones.
Yes, I see what you're doing though, but what it does though is it gives you kind of a, what we call maybe a shadow price here on, in terms of if you didn't go with Airbnb, what would be the next price? That gives you a reasonable thing. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, really does. Start comparing properties and then
And
you,
then I select a few, you mark them on Airbnb. There's a thing that you do to like favorites or
Yes.
something, you make folders.
okay. Start comparing properties. So have we selected Airbnb yet or not yet?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so can I put a step here, which is
Yes.
select
Mhm.
Airbnb,
Mhm.
and then you, is that called starring things or favoriting things, or what is that called? Bookmarking, favoriting,
Depends on the site.
okay? Because on Airbnb, you can create lists of favorites and different things. You can star things, I think, but then you can, or no, it's heart them, you heart them.
Yeah, and you have the trip, like you may have something for New York and something for Italy and something for Mexico.
Yes, okay, so you select, so what do you do? Yeah, so you select Airbnb,
Mhm.
and then what do you do next?
And then I select a lot of options.
Okay.
I save them into the trip that I created on Airbnb.
And save. Okay, and you save the options. I like that. Then what do you do next?
And then I click and start reading all the details.
You read details.
Yeah.
Okay, then what happens next? Unfortunately, I have another page here.
After looking at several of them, I start, I find out some of them offer things that I must have and some others don't.
Okay, so identify
The must-haves.
must-haves. Excellent. Then what?
And then, so I start unliking or eliminating
Okay.
the ones that don't.
Eliminate properties without must-haves. Got it?
Okay.
Next.
And then you know how sometimes, well, every time they charge you taxes and cleaning fee and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So when I have just a few, maybe I have like, I don't know, maybe 5 of them.
Yep.
I start going up to the last step, so I know exactly how much it's going to cost.
Okay, so-
That's a few more clicks.
yes,
I don't know.
get full information. Is that okay? Can I say that?
Or final cost. I know I like them, but
Yes,
I'm not sure, like, some of them are very expensive
yes.
with a cleaning fee.
Well, the cleaning fees, holy cow, what are they paying these people? You know, I mean, are they going around like with a toothbrush around every corner of the house? And it's like, you know, what are they doing here? I mean, honestly, you'll pay like $200 for cleaning. It's like, seriously? Okay,
Okay.
sorry for ranting.
So once I have my favorite ones and the price is affordable, then I can just make a note on a notebook, or I can do a spreadsheet if I feel like, you know, I have more time. And so I prepare it to show it to my husband.
Yes, okay. So is the MBA program forcing you to make a spreadsheet now? Kind of what there. Like, things used to be so simple. It's just like, yeah, you just compare them. And now it's like, no, we got to do a factor analysis here and we have to run the numbers here. Okay.
Sometimes I just screenshot.
Okay. You know the favorites, the ones that are the winners that make it to that point. Then what happens?
And then I have to discuss with my husband.
Discuss with husband.
Uh-huh. Sometimes we find the right place in that first discussion, and some other times he's like, can you find something cheaper? Or
Okay.
can you find something that has a pool? Or can you find something?
Okay, so you have consensus.
Yes. So that would be like a decision.
If no, so I'm going to simplify just for the sake of space here. I'm going to say no, we go back up to step, what, 8?
Yeah, must have.
If you know, go to 8. So if yes, if you have consensus, if yes, then what do?
Then I just book it.
Then you book it. Then what?
I prepare my suitcases. I leave.
Wow. Then what?
And then I drive.
Drive?
Depending if it's close enough.
Okay, now, okay. Then what?
Then I have to message the host to get the keys, like to get, like, how am I going to enter the property? Are they gonna give me keys? Do I have to register like in a front desk? What
Yes.
type- it depends on the type of property, right? Sometimes it's like a digital, like, number. I just have to type. So I have to communicate, message the host for like, arrangement.
Is that okay? The arrival info? You know how to arrive and when you're gonna arrive. They often want to know that, I found. So a message host for arrival info, then what?
And to get the keys, is that the arrival info too?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
then I.
Arrival info, then what?
Then drive there. Like,
You already drove.
oh, well, I get there. I enter, I open the door.
Okay. Enter
Uh-huh,
property.
uh-huh.
I think that was our last step. Customer enters the property. So I think we made it to the end. Okay, so excellent. This is great. What we're going to do now is we are going to review to make sure I got this right. So as you review, so after they reach this last step, review the steps with them so they can make corrections. As you review the steps silently, so I'm going to do that myself, but we're going to do it as a class. Mark whether the step is performed by the provider, the check provider, the customer, or interactively, so direct interaction. Also note if the step involves weight, decisions, or some other entity. Does that make sense? So now we'll just kind of do a quick little review of this. So let me just clarify to make sure I got these right. Now, you can show the person the list. There's nothing secret about this. So if they want to, they can look at it. Assuming your handwriting is better than my handwriting is, that they can actually read this here. And so, or you can just read it to them. So Marissa, let me just clarify so that we, a customer needs a getaway. Then, where am I going to mark that? Is that customer, provider? Is that interactive or not? Okay, that's customer. And customer needs a getaway. So see, that's going to be helpful to me when I create my PCN diagram, right? So search online for services. So again, the provider in this case is a combination of kind of Airbnb and the host is what we're considering. So search online for services. What would that be?
Very good.
Okay. Surrogate interaction. Yep, not direct interaction, surrogate. Enter dates and place. What would that be? Surrogate interaction. Then you start comparing properties. Same, surrogate interaction. You select an Airbnb. So you, at that point, you choose to go with Airbnb.
Surrogate.
Still surrogate. Anything else? Is that a decision? Yeah, kind of is a decision, isn't it? Okay, so we make a decision here. Then you select options and save. So this is the property options. Select some property options and save those. That might be surrogate as well. Then you read the details in the ones that you're interested in.
The number 6 is a decision too, right? I think so as well.
Oh, for sure. Excellent. Then you read the details, which is probably, again, surrogate interaction. Then you identify must-haves. What is that? Think class?
Independent.
That could be independent, but you know what? The way she described it, she was identifying the must-haves from what she saw was available. This is a funny thing. I actually do the same thing myself, so I'm kind of getting out of the interview here for just a second, is that I actually find that as I go through, I thought, oh, I didn't even think about that. You know, that could be something that could be valuable here. An example is I found out that I love properties that come with bikes, because otherwise if I have to go rent bikes, it's a hassle sometimes. But if they come with bikes, it's like, oh, I only want properties that come with bikes, because if I find out that there's in a particular area, like as an example. So that could be independent or surrogate. This is again something that I just figured out in my mind as I'm doing the interview. Okay, so identify must-haves. Then you eliminate properties without the must-haves. That's the next step. Then you get the full information that you gather. See, we do have a lot of surrogate in these. The processes that you're going to do, hopefully we'll have more direct interaction and stuff like that. Airbnb is a little bit on direct interaction in many cases. Dylan?
Number 9, would that be a decision also, deciding which ones you're eliminating?
Yep, I think so. Excellent. Then note your favorites. So that's going to be surrogate again, maybe decision there. Discuss it with the husband. Well, it is a decision. Actually, the decision is probably right here, but it's just discuss it with the husband. That could be independent, but you're really discussing the Airbnb options. So I would put that probably more as surrogate. Now, the funny thing about it is I do have an exception to this, and that is when you're interacting with an entity outside of that particular dyad that you're diagramming there, you can put things that involve other entities in independent, meaning interactions you have with other entities. So that frankly could be surrogate, or it could be frankly independent, meaning it's a different process relationship there that's tied into this one. Does that make sense? So it could kind of go either way. Okay, so do we have consensus? That's something you might determine independent of Airbnb. The rule kind of is, can you do the step if the other entity didn't exist? Sure, you could come up with a consensus. If for some reason Airbnb didn't exist, you could still come up with a consensus, but you wouldn't be able to act on it because Airbnb doesn't exist. Okay, then you book it. What would that be? Surrogate. Okay, so you have consensus, then you book it. Now, Parker, please.
So Airbnb is an app.
Yes.
So wouldn't you be directly
No.
interacting with it?
We decided that the provider was the host, not.
Provider's the host, yes.
Okay.
And so Airbnb is kind of the facilitator of that interaction there. So the direct interaction, the way that PCN analysis was originally conceived, and it may change at some future version, but is that when you interact with technology, it's always going to be surrogate interaction, unless it's using to mediate interaction with a human being. So that direct interaction is person-to-person interaction. So if I talk to somebody on the phone, even though I'm talking to a technology, I'm really talking to somebody on the phone. The challenge is that as artificial intelligence gets more sophisticated, the Turing test may actually be solved at some point where we can't tell the difference between talking to a person and talking to a robot, in which case I would say talking to technology might be direct interaction.
So is it just strictly communication? Because you're paying the provider through the app.
Yeah. It's communication, yeah.
Interesting.
It's communication and we're communicating through the app. The app is just simply a mediator between us and the host. So good question. All right, so then we book it. Now, one of the things here, this process, well, we'll come to this in just a second here. Then you book it. Then you prepare your suitcase, you pack for this, okay? The preparing the suitcase, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna list that one as just independent, you know? Then you drive to the location. Surrogate, probably, to the location, because it's to that location,
Why would you classify that as surrogate?
because it's their location. It could be either, it could be independent. That's one that I think we talked about that before. It could kind of go either way. Nick?
The one before also be surrogate, because if they have a pool, you need a bathing suit, but if they don't have a pool,
Yeah.
that's you packing is dependent upon what you're doing.
Yes, good question, good point. Is you could pack based on that, but again, think about it. Is it something that you can do if the other entity didn't exist? So it could kind of go either way. It could be surrogate. I kind of view it a little more independent in that particular situation, so.
In our example, so going to the drive location, in the examples we've talked about are in class. Anytime we were driving to like Home Depot or wherever, that always, if I'm remembering correctly, was a direct interaction.
Driving to Home Depot? No, it's never.
No?
Never direct interaction. It's either surrogate or independent.
Or-
It's independent.
That's what I meant, sorry, independent.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. It is, it's usually independent. See here's the way I think about it is, if you're driving to Home Depot, can you drive to Home Depot if there's no Home Depot? Yeah, you can. So that can be independent. Then you find a parking space. Can you find a parking space if there's no Home Depot? No, I don't think so. Meaning there's kind of degrees to this. And what we'll find out in the analysis is it probably doesn't matter in terms of that sense. But what we do care about, which we covered in chapter 5, which is the degree and as we change it, meaning that there's a big difference between driving to a location and having the location drive us to the location. Does that make sense? And so that could be a very different thing in terms of the process relationship that we have there. So yeah, I wouldn't lose too much, sleep or anxiety over that particular one there. Good questions. Any other questions about that? All right. Well, there is something that is causing me a little anxiety right now. I don't know. Nobody else seems to be catching on this here. This is an example of where I might want to nudge something a little bit here, Dylan.
So this be after you book the property, but before you prepare your suitcase, there's probably a waiting period in between there.
That's what I thought. It seems like you went from booking it. You must have better last minute planning than I do here. No, this is great. It's booking. It's like, hold on, I just hit the submit button here, so we got to be there in 2 hours. Okay, true?
Sometimes.
Okay. Well, the reason is we haven't had a chance to have any wait steps in this process yet. So is that okay? I don't want to, this is a nudge here. I'm not trying to direct you here, but sometimes after you book it, is there a wait in here?
Yeah.
Where will we put the wait?
You could put it before and after that step.
Yeah, I think we'll put it right here, right? Is that right? Wait for, the trip. Or approximately the trip dates. So you're going to wait for that. See, that's what I wanted to illustrate there is that sometimes we miss a step. And that's why we use every other line. See, is that these allow us to annotate this. If you miss multiple steps, it might be a problem. You might have to scribble or add another piece of paper or something like that. But if they miss a step, you can just add it in there like that. Okay. So thank you for not putting the wait in because I was hoping that we'd get an example of adding this. So wait for the trip date. Now, there actually is another one that we would have done if this was the Sampson household, which is discuss with husband. Is sometimes the Sampsons, we kind of drag on for like a week or two about things. And it's like, oh, we're going to talk about that trip. Oh yeah, we got to talk about that. And meaning the Sampsons would actually have probably no favorites, a wait for, convenient time where we're, sitting down where we can talk about it and kind of review things and stuff like that. So,
I would do that too. It depends on the trip.
yeah, depends on the trip. Only if you want me to. I'm not,
It works.
otherwise I would be guilty of leading. Okay.
If I'm going to Mexico, I will.
Yes, wait for discussion time. And so I'm going to mark that as a wait. See, there's this little wait thing here. And then this one as well, wait, I'll mark that as a wait. And wait for the trip date, and that could be, that's something, again, the same kind of thing. You could kind of independently, you're kind of waiting for that date, so it could kind of go either surrogate or independent. Okay. This one, I'm going to put this as customer waiting independently, customer. Okay. Then you prepare the suitcase, then you drive to the location, then you message host for the arrival information. Correct. Okay.
It's still a message.
What's that?
It's still a message.
It's a message, but it's kind of asynchronous. It's not person to person. You're kind of putting a message out there, and then they're going to reply to the message at some point. It's hopefully within an hour, because some of them says within an hour they respond, and sometimes it can be longer than that. So that's kind of to message the host is probably going to be surrogate interaction, unless you call the person, which you usually don't do, So and that could be surrogate interaction. And there might also be a parallel step, which is the host sending you that information. Right? So can I put that step into send arrival info? And that is also surrogate because it's responding to your message. That's providing surrogate information. Does that make sense? Please.
Remind me what the other would comprise.
The other is if there's another entity, and I should have done that over here. I should have said other husband. That's another entity. Okay. All right, so we message the host, they send the arrival information. Now, here is another interesting thing is, and this is why I'm suggesting this is surrogate, not direct interaction, is if you ever had a host that doesn't get back with you, they're kind of delayed. So could there be in between here another step, which is message the host for arrival information? Could there be another step that's a wait step? Wait or reply. Mark that as a wait step there. Okay. And the reason is, we haven't covered this yet, we're going to cover this after the midterm, is how do you manage waiting? You know, these waits can be excruciating sometimes. They can be deal breakers, you know. It's like you haven't heard from somebody, you don't know what's going to happen with this thing and such like that. And so how do we manage the waits? So I think that that's going to be something that's going to be relevant, that level of detail. So then we get the arrival information. So that's when you actually receive the information that they sent you. Then you enter the property. Now, actually, Marissa, these steps here, are these steps after you've driven to the location?
Sometimes they're not, because I think I have the right information, but then I'm driving and I'm like, well, I can't get there with all of these details. So sometimes I have to text them again as I'm driving.
Oh, okay, good. I like that. So I'm going to leave them here because we do that. In fact, in a real situation, not the one we're going to do just for the exercise, we might include it in both places, that we have the information and then we say we check the information and it's like, oh, it doesn't make sense, or we arrive at the property and it's like something unclear about that, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. Does that make sense? All right, so far so good. All right, thank you. So that's part one. We're not done yet. We have part 2 and 3. So now for each step in part 2, we identify the perceived value of the step to the customers. We show them the card and review the 4 options. Then for each of the steps, record which of the card options the subject indicates. So I'm going to take my little packet here and tear off this page. This is the last page of the interview thing. So we have 4 different kind of levels of value here. And this is how valuable it is to customers. So if you're interviewing a frontline employee, or if you're interviewing a manager, you still do it from the perspective of the customers. Now, this Airbnb one, as we're describing here, is not going to work well for a frontline employee, right? Because there really is no frontline employee. It's all automated. So for the ones that you select, please select something that involves a frontline employee, because that'll be an interesting perspective to add to the analysis. Does that make sense? Okay, so for each of the steps, I'll go through this again. What I want you to tell me is, does the step, is it very valuable? Meaning, does it make customers happy, really meets the customer's needs? Or is it somewhat valuable, meaning it somewhat meets customers' needs, makes the customers a little bit happy? Or is it necessary but not valuable, meaning we have to have the step, but it doesn't make customers either happy or sad? Or is it not necessary and not valuable? It's not clear why we have the step, and it'd be better if we didn't have the step. Does that make sense? Now, as you do this, especially if you're sitting across the table from somebody, I suggest you just put this in front of them. And they'll look at it. And what they'll actually, you'll find do is often they'll use their finger and they'll touch it like it's a button here and, pick which one it is. So I'll let you hold on to that while I go through the process. So here's our first page again. So the customer needs a getaway. Is that very valuable, somewhat valuable, necessary but not valuable, or not necessary nor valuable?
It is very valuable.
Okay. They search online for services.
It is somewhat valuable.
Somewhat valuable. You enter the dates and place.
It is somewhat valuable.
Somewhat valuable. You start to compare properties.
It is somewhat valuable.
Okay, good. You select the Airbnb. You select Airbnb.
Very valuable.
Very valuable. You select property options and save them.
Very valuable.
Okay. You read the details of the properties.
Necessary but not valuable.
Okay. Sometimes they are hard to read through a little bit. All right. Second, I get the page here. Identify must-haves.
Somewhat valuable.
Okay. Eliminate the property without the must-haves.
Very valuable.
You get the full information about properties and the costs.
That's somewhat valuable.
Okay. You note your favorites.
Very valuable.
You wait for the discussion time with your husband.
Necessary.
Okay. Don't worry, we'll keep this to ourselves here. It is going out on YouTube, but we'll keep it to ourselves. Okay, discuss it with your husband.
Necessary, but I'll tell you later.
We'll have process improvement. That's for the end of the semester here. Have consensus, determining consensus.
Yeah, it is very valuable.
Very valuable, okay. You book it.
It is very valuable.
It makes you happy. Okay, you wait for the trip date.
It is necessary but not valuable.
Okay. Next page. Preparing your suitcase.
It is somewhat valuable.
Somewhat valuable. Drive to the location.
Somewhat valuable.
Message the host for the arrival information.
Somewhat valuable.
Okay. You wait for the reply.
Necessary but not valuable.
Okay. The host sends you the arrival information.
Yes, very valuable.
Very valuable. You get the arrival information.
Very valuable.
Very valuable. And then you enter the property.
Very.
Very valuable. Fantastic. Okay, so that's part two. That'll help us get an idea of the value proposition. Now, again, you're doing 3 different interviews. Are they all going to be the same? Not likely. You will find some surprises where things that the manager might think are super valuable, and the customer says, oh, that's kind of a waste of time. It's like, what? What's with that? So there's, again, opportunities we'll have for process improvement. All right, third and final part of the interview phase is, for each of the 4 problem categories shown on the card, identify which steps have problems recording brief description. So first show the card and describe the 4 categories, then identify the steps. So can I get this back, please? And so what I'm going to do is tear off this part 2 and show you part 3 here. So to the customers, which steps, so what I'm going to do is ask you about the process. I'd like to know to a customer, so again, customer perspective here, regardless of who you're interviewing, which steps are inconvenient, meaning they require unwanted effort. And I'm also going to ask about which steps are confusing, meaning it's unclear to customers and maybe even unclear to employees. Which steps are difficult, meaning it requires excessive effort, knowledge, or ability to perform. And finally, which steps are likely to fail, meaning the step has an uncertain outcome and reasonable likelihood of failure. Does that make sense? So let's start with the first one. So for these, we only go through them kind of one at a time. So let's start with inconvenient. And so again, feel free to describe the steps or show this sheet to your interviewee. So are there any steps that you think are inconvenient that maybe, require unwanted effort?
You didn't say it. It's true.
I'm not gonna mark
I
that.
was thinking of another one. Isn't there another that is worse than inconvenient?
That.
Another one of the four?
Yes, well, I don't know. They all in their own ways have problems, confusing, difficult. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll mark that one for later.
Requires a lot of energy.
Okay, a lot of energy.
Mhm.
Yes.
I always, well, most of the time I confess.
Yes, yeah. Because it's a matter of him just realizing that he's wrong.
Exactly.
Got it. All right, so I put that one under difficult. So still, we're looking for inconvenient first.
Inconvenient would be when I have to read all the details.
Okay, read the details. Why is that inconvenient?
It requires effort, it requires time. They're not all listed in the same order sometimes, or
Yes.
the descriptions. If they all have the same things like step 1, step 2, step 3, so you can easily compare, that would make it easier, but no, you have to read them.
Yes, you got to read them. You got to read them. Yes, effort in reading. Okay, good. So that's inconvenient. Is there any others that are inconvenient besides that?
No. Well, when I have to wait for them to answer my message,
Okay, yeah. Waiting for the reply. And what's inconvenient about that?
well, I want them to respond right away.
Yeah.
I have to wait, and sometimes if I'm already driving,
Yeah.
I'm like, hey,
Oh,
how am I gonna sleep tonight?
Now, are you actually driving and texting at the
No,
same?
my husband is
Oh, your
driving.
husband's driving. Okay, good. That's a problem. That's likely to fail there. All right, so you want to wait. You're impatient. Can I put that down?
Yes.
You're impatient that, you want to respond, especially if you're getting to the property and you want to get that resolved. Okay, excellent. And so you can ask about others that might be inconvenient. Let's do a little bit of the next one here, which is confusing. Are there any steps that are unclear to customers and maybe even unclear to employees?
No,
Nothing that's confusing here.
no, well, I don't know if when they give me the location or when they give me the instructions of how to open,
Yes?
I left the key under the mat that is next to the trash can.
Yeah.
Like, it happened once. Yeah, but
Okay,
I don't know how to enter. Oh, they had an alarm.
okay.
Yeah, and
Alarm,
I didn't know how to turn it
many
off.
steps.
And then they wouldn't answer, so I wouldn't dare
Yeah.
go in.
Yeah, so actually, okay, this is an aside, so this is not part of the interview here, but as an aside, especially if I'm traveling in other countries where they don't do building numbering the same like UK, in the US, it's like, 276 South. Okay, so 276 means 2 blocks and 3/4 of a block, how that works? It's kind of numerical. So it's kind of like that. In the UK, it's you number every house, but then they'll insert a house between houses. And it's like, this doesn't work here. So like 27, and then like 100 feet later is 28. And then they have in between, it's like, okay, 27, 28. I have the 2 here, but if the 5 houses in between there, I can't figure out which one, what I'm talking about? Meaning we could have confusing steps. So what I'm saying is I can really feel for her about this. Sometimes you get the steps and it's like, I don't know what to do. In fact, I had one in Italy just recently where the host met us outside of the property, take us to the property. The property involved going through a big gate. You had to have a little card, a little fob thing to get through. And then after that, you had to go through another gate. And then after that, you had to go up some stairs to an elevator, up a floor, around an area, through a courtyard. And then on the other end of the courtyard, you had to find the right door, and you go in the door, and then you go up 2 flights of stairs. And then it was at the top of the stairs. And my wife, as we're walking with the host, she said, I think we're going to find our way back here. He says, okay, we're going to leave breadcrumbs. So it's like dropping breadcrumbs all the way along. It's like, okay, all the breadcrumbs. So anyway, I'm sorry, that's a complete aside. Don't do that in your interviews here. But I mean, but see, that can be confusing, can it? Okay. Finally, we'll see. Any steps that are, oops, wrong sheet here. Here. Any that are difficult, that require excessive effort, knowledge, and ability to perform.
Yeah, it's just the one talking with my husband.
Okay, well, we already have that. It takes a lot of energy. Do that, okay. Finally, steps that are likely to fail. Are there any steps here that you think might be likely to fail?
Talking to your husband, right? Because you said sometimes he shuts it all down.
He has this now. He has this figured out. Nick?
You can have a failure rate on finding a place with Airbnb.
Yeah.
You know, depends, you may fail there.
But see, she didn't say it, so I won't mark it down. But other interviews, we might interview somebody else that might say, because the problem is if you get your must-haves and it gets down to the empty set, meaning there's nothing left, then you have to make the trade-offs there. Is you want a place with a view. I mean, for me, I actually had this going down to San Clemente, is I wanted a place that was under, I can't remember what the number was, but I didn't go under that. And I wanted a place that had enough rooms for everybody. And I also wanted a place that was walking to the beach. It was near bike trails. And when I got all my must-haves in there, something had to give. And so I wound up spending more than $500 a night for a place. It's like, you know, so that could be a fail point as an example. Meaning, I'm not saying, I'm suggesting that fail points could exist, but in the interview, don't, as an example, avoid nudging them too much on that and saying, you know, are you sure this could be a failure here? Because let them depict it, and then you get the other depictions from the other interviews, and you bring those together, that'll give you a really better accurate picture of what the process is like. So does that make sense? All right. Thank you so much. Well, that's the interviews. So again, interviewing a manager, a customer, and frontline employee. In this case, we didn't have a frontline employee, but you'll probably have one in the process. You do. Are these interviews going to come out the same? Are you going to get the same steps and the same value perceptions and the same failure and difficult things like that? Probably not. Who is the most reliable source of information? The manager, the frontline employee, the customer? None of them? All of them? Who do you think is the most, who do you think has the best depiction of the process? What do you think? Customer? You think so? Manager?
I mean, they know what's supposed to happen.
Yes.
And then the customer know how they feel and what the experience is. So
Yeah. So the manager has kind of the ideal, the design perspective on the process, meaning here's the way the process was supposed to go. The customer, on the other hand, you know, they may think, this process doesn't work for me. I want this to be, I mean, as an example with Airbnb, you're not supposed to call the people. But I have had people who will try to sneak in and send you their email address or their phone number. You know, it's like, just call me for this, or here's the, you know that Airbnb, they filter out email addresses here and let you type in a name at AT, whatever like that. You know, people try to get around that because the reason is that sometimes you just want to talk to the person directly. You don't want to wait for Airbnb, you know, on the platform to kind of process messages. And so there might be the customer's perspective, which is more of the way it really works. What about the frontline employee? What's their perspective on it? Do they more favor the management perspective of how the process was designed, or do they more favor the customer perspective on just give me the solution to this? What do you think? Yeah, it's going to be a blend of both, isn't it? So that's what I'm hoping you see as you do these, as you see different perspectives. It's probably the manager, you know, might have the biggest, broadest perspective on this, but also be the most naive because maybe not understanding about how workarounds and the process is tweaked and such like that. Does that make sense? All right. So you do your 3 interviews and then you need to do a report. So any questions about the interviews? Let me show you the reports here. So just go to the screen, just a second. I can actually share my screen here. Just a second, share screen. All right. Sharing the screen. Ricky, can you see the screen?
Yeah, you're sharing it.
Sharing? Okay. I don't have the little green line around it. That's why I ask. Okay. Oops. I have to change the screen here. Oops. Sorry. Technology here. Okay. So on Learning Suite, here we're in the class learning suite. And if you go to content under service process audits, there's information from the syllabus about how they work. Here's the write-up. It's 2 to 4 pages. And you answer these 6 questions here. I'll show you that in just a second. And then a cover page, and I talk about how they'll be evaluated. So be sure and put your cover page on this. The steps to conduct the audit. You need to get a team. We have teams now, right? Meet your team. We need to do that. Study the instructions, which we've talked about. Such. Here is the service process audit form. So if you need another copy of the form, oops, I just lost my monitor here. Just a second. There we go. So there's the form if you need to print out another copy of that for some reason. Here is my write-up. Again, 2 to 4 pages. They're very rarely under 4 pages. So meaning they tend to be about 4 pages long. So let me open this up here. So for my write-up, I put in whatever year. I put the service process, what business I was doing, the team. So whatever your team is, A, B, C, or D, or whatever, and the name of your team members, and put the date on it. What is the company or industry? Here's what I studied. What's the studied process? So again, you can use this Word file as a template if you want. Just be sure and delete my stuff out of there. Leave the headings in, but delete my stuff there. How was the information gathered? Who did you interview and how did that go? And what were their roles and so forth? What were the depictions of the process? Refer to your PCN diagram as appropriate. That will be appropriate. So refer to your diagram. How do they differ? Why do you suppose they differ? So this is going to be some important analysis that we'll be able to talk about after you turn these in. Another question here is, what is the value proposition? Refer to the PCN diagram. So how did you see value play out here? What was perceived as valuable? What was perceived as maybe less valuable and so forth? What are the possible problems with the process? Refer to the PCN diagram. So let me show you my diagram here, back on Learning Suite. So here is, and now I did these as separate files. On occasion, people will import the PowerPoint into their Word file. That's not the best because it makes fonts really small sometimes. So it's probably better to just submit 2 files here. So here for mine, again, as I do usually, I did an air travel thing. So this is booking a ticket with the BYU travel office. I did 2 diagrams, one for by phone and one for by email. Excuse me, because they gave me 2 different processes. Here's kind of the value proposition, putting the smiley faces and frowny faces based on what came from the interview. And then finally, here is difficult and failure points and confusing things and so forth. They kind of depicted those in the process. Again, as I mentioned, in this assignment, your purpose is not to come up with new innovations and improvements to the process. It's just simply to document what happened there. But from this, then you can work on your futures presentation, which will be at the end of the semester. Any questions? Okay, so you work on these as teams. You only need to turn in 1 set of reports on Learning Suite. They're due a week from Saturday. I have them scheduled to be due by 10 p.m. So we'll get you to bed at a earlier time than the 11:59 deadline that I usually have. If you have any questions, let me know. The one thing I implore you to do is to get working on it now. Because even though you have almost 2 weeks, more than a week and a half to work on these things, we also have a midterm in there. And sometimes if the company you contact, sometimes the contacts fall through and you need to get a different company. If you wait till, late next week, you're going to be in trouble for that. So get that going now. You're usually better off picking companies that you might know somebody from the company, you might know a manager, or a local company are usually better to do than big national chains just because of bureaucracy and such like that. All right, any questions?